Hey everyone, welcome to the 337th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have it felt anemic, but now it's a pretty full show for you today. So we're going to be talking about smart home devices to help prepare for climate change, the end of 3G, a new bill in California that we kind of like, more security woes for the IoT industry, some new products that help with Z-Wave and HomeKit, dogs, and smart home stuff in general, plus a little tidbit about everybody's favorite cheap device company, Wyze. We also have information about Silicon Labs' Works With event coming up, and we also have to talk about two big deals in the access control space. And Charlie Kindle, who's been an executive at Amazon, Control4, Microsoft, done a lot of work in the smart home space. He's now thinking about IoT in space.
Charlie is the best.
Yeah, like the great beyond. Charlie's here to talk about the new space flywheel. So it's a fun interview. Y'all will like it. Okay, so before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. This week's sponsor is Infineon, world leader in semiconductor solutions that make life easier, safer, and greener. Shaping everything for the IoT, AI, and Industry 4.0 to deep machine learning and intuitive sensing, the digital transformation is becoming reality, and the physical world will be connected with the virtual world like it never has been before. Infineon is the link between the real and the digital world, and you can learn more about Infineon and its solutions at Infineon.com. All right, let's talk about climate change. Woof.
Oh, before we do that, can I just complain? Can I whine about one of my devices?
Yeah, whine away, my friend.
Okay. This may not sound relevant at first, but I think you'll understand why it sort of is. And this is my own fault. I will say that right up front. I lost my Apple Airpods charging case, so I cannot use my Airpods. And the weird thing is, they are part of the Find My network, but I can't find them because Apple can't find them. I go to find my devices and it says, can't find them. Last location unknown. What the heck? Do they delete the last known location after 30 days or something?
Huh. I wonder if they're sitting in a Faraday cage. Maybe they're in your freezer.
Maybe. Granted, again, my fault that I lost them, clearly. I don't know how. I don't ever really take the case out of the house, so I think they're still in the house. But I can't use the UWB stuff. I can't use Find My. I don't need AirTags for them because they're part of Find My with their Bluetooth.
Well, is the battery dead in them, I guess?
But probably, but it still should have a last known.
Yeah, that is weird.
Yeah, so what's up with that? If it is the battery, what happens if you've got AirTags and you don't realize your battery's dead? You might lose something and never find it again. Anyway, my fault. I just wanted to mention, I'm kind of disappointed in that.
Yeah, that is disappointing. I feel like my Jabras will tell me the last known location, although since it doesn't have ultra wideband, it's pretty much like your house. And I'm like, thank you.
Right. Yeah. Again, these don't have UWB either. So, I could get the region of the house, but I can't get anything. They're just gone. Well, there is an Apple event next week and there are supposed to be new AirPods. So I guess that's why they're missing.
Oh, yeah. Let's briefly talk about events and then we'll get to the show. But Apple's set its event for Tuesday, September 14th. We will be paying attention. Yay. Actually, Kevin will be paying attention because I will be at the Works With event for Silicon Labs on the 14th and the 15th.
And we means me.
We means, yeah. Well, in this case, it does. But Silicon Labs is they're obviously a sponsor, but I'm also doing a panel on the 15th all about medical devices and IoT. That's going to be super fun. So, and then finally, other final event is on the 21st. I am having a Stacey on IoT event all about RF sensing. So we're going to be talking about ultra wideband, LiDAR, Wi-Fi 802.11.bf. There's one more in there I'm forgetting. Oh,
BF?
BF. That's the new standard for Wi-Fi sensing. It's the first one that's not for communication.
I've already learned something and I didn't even go to the event yet. I'll have to go now.
I always think about it as Wi-Fi best friends, and sensing will be Wi-Fi's best friend with communication. Just in case you need a little mnemonic, since there are so many 802.11s running around out there. And also, we'll be talking about, solely like radar and what the heck 60 gigahertz is doing in all of these things, and it's going to be fun. So if you're into that, go to stacyoniot.com/RF and you can register. It's free. And so, yeah, 3 events. Now, let's talk about climate change.
Doom and gloom.
Doom and gloom. So, last week was kind of a big week. We had Ida come through both the southern states and the Northeast, and the Northeast took such a pounding.
Oh, did we ever?
Yeah, but also in the West, still forest fires, air's quality is sucking. We're all like, holy cow, this climate change thing is real. And it's getting worse faster. So Kevin and I thought about some things that might make your life a little easier. This was in the newsletter, but if you don't get the newsletter, why not? But if you don't, we came up with 5 devices, and I'd love to hear what you guys actually think might be relevant here too. So because I'm in the West, I'm all about air purifiers and air quality sensors. We talk about this all the time, but they don't even have to be smart. It's nice, I will say, if they're smart simply because you can turn them on remotely and monitor things. And it also helps it so it doesn't run all the time. So when it's like, oh, I don't detect problems, you don't have to use the electricity, basically.
Yeah, the smart mitigation is really, I think, key if that's important to you, to run your fans or your AC or not run them because the air coming in is just too nasty right now for, because of wildfires, for example.
Yeah. And then we talked about smart sump pumps, which might give you, if your basement's flooding in the Northeast because of a hurricane, that, you don't need a smart sump pump, but it's kind of nice to know that it won't fail, or if it's going to fail, it's going to let you know.
His readers were quite adamant about telling me that they don't need a smart sump pump. And I get it. I really do. Having gone through a loss of $5,000 worth of things in my basement because my sump pump burnt out without my knowledge at work, that's why this was important to me. But I get it.
Yeah, some of these things are hard to pay for. Like one of the things is a water monitoring thing. And, people have a hard time paying, like the one that does the automatic water shutoff plus tracking for leaks in your home is $700 plus like a plumber.
It's like insurance in a sense, right? It's like insurance to me because, yes, it may never actually be needed. So therefore you're like, what are the odds? Is it worth $700 or whatever it is? But once you don't have it and you needed it, boy, oh boy, you're going to pay a lot more for the reparation costs and so on.
Yeah. And that's where things get iffy. And we put that on there because water monitoring, when Texas froze in February, a lot of people didn't have the ability. They weren't in their homes because they evacuated, or they had no way to turn off their water pipes, but their pipes were frozen. And so many people came home to burst pipes, and that didn't have to happen. And then the other element, Kevin just bought one. It's a battery. We decided it should have smarts simply because then you have a better sense of what your battery life is left, how fast it's charging things, how much electricity certain things use. You can kind of see it on the device and in an app.
You can see it on the device or the connected app. The battery I bought, I think I mentioned it a couple shows ago, but some people on Twitter wanted to know for sure, so maybe I didn't. I purchased the EcoFlow River battery. I was on sale at Amazon, and then I recently got I got an accessory for it, which is an entire second battery pack. And it's modular, this device. So I can add the second battery pack to the original unit, making a heavier and bigger battery, but it still looks like all one battery. And that doubled my capacity. But as I said, it has Wi-Fi. I like this because, again, going back to the sump pump, a lot of people put like a car battery or some other lead acid battery for a battery backup for sump pumps. And that's fine. These are lithium ion batteries. So they'll last a lot longer, more cycles, etc. I actually had to use this with Ida because we did lose power and we had a lot of water in the sump pit. And most batteries don't provide enough wattage to run something with a motor like a sump pump. And this says it will go up to 600 watts, but they also have this X boost button, which for a short time can up the wattage all the way up to 1800 watts. And it worked. It also works on other high wattage appliances such as hair dryers and coffee machines and whatever else. So those are some of the reasons that I bought this one. I'm not saying you need it, but if it's something you're interested in. You can also recharge this with solar, which a cheap 100-watt solar panel is what I use to recharge it for free.
Yeah. And then we just threw this in here as a fun idea, a low-cost drone. So a sub $100 drone just to check your roof.
Yeah, seriously. You might not realize that in a storm like this, you've lost some shingles, you've got a potential leak problem, and until it's too late. You know, when I had my old Parrot drone, I would go up and check the roof, check the gutters, see if there were leaves in the gutters. It's a heck of a lot safer than putting a ladder up 2 stories or whatever. And it's relatively inexpensive. And you can have some fun with it when, you know, the weather allows.
Those were our ideas. Send us others if you've recently discovered something. These should try to be somewhat smart. Like we didn't include like rechargeable lamps or, you know, camp stoves or things like that, which are also good to have, but they're a little like, there's no need for those to be smart. All right. Let us talk about the end of 3G. This is both in Europe and in the US. Commercial 3G services have been around since 2000, 2001. So we're talking 20 some odd years, and it's time for those to end. This is happening in the US. This is happening in Europe. And in the US, we're looking at the beginning of next year. So February 2022 for like AT&T and Verizon's network, I believe. Vodafone has already shut down 2 of their networks. They have shut down Italy and the Czech Republic in 2021 for its 3G shutdown. So basically the next year or so, we're going to see a lot of 3G networks shut down. And what does this mean for you as a consumer? Maybe nothing, but there's a lot of 3G radios in IoT devices everywhere from like my Tesla still has a 3G modem to maybe the 3G backup on your alarm system. So back in August of last year, I talked to some people about what this means. And for most customers, your provider has been very active in trying to tell you like, hey, let's switch out this hub that you have that uses 3G. And you should be hearing from them. I say should because, you know, on the alarm side, I know that Point Central, Alarm.com, ADT, they've actually been working really hard at getting this. And I've talked to some of the manufacturing companies. They're upgrading their stuff, but I haven't heard from Tesla. So I don't know what's going to happen there.
It's only $1,000.
Is it?
No, I'm kidding.
Well, the new modules, I think, are $500. So,
oof.
Well, I mean, that's worth it, I guess.
I get it. You got to have it done. And speaking of having it done, we actually just had the radio for our water meter swapped out for this very reason. Mm-hmm. You know, it didn't cost us anything. You know, that's all covered as part of the utilities and all that. But yeah, those are the kinds of things you may see just in the background happening in your, you know, anything that's metered in your home that's read remotely.
Yeah. So keep an eye open and, you know, come February or so. And I should also tell you, the consumer network shutoffs are not necessarily the same dates as the commercial. So some of the commercial companies have negotiated slightly longer timelines. So I'm again, super curious what's going to happen with my car. I'm just like, woo, we'll see. Okay. Let's talk about positive news in the legal front. California legislators have passed a bill in the House in May, and their upper chamber is expected to vote on it next week on algorithmic accountability. And basically, this is pushing back against the productivity measurements that Amazon is allegedly using in their warehouses. And these are things that, you know, invoke quota systems that track and monitor people's motions and if they're packing quickly enough and that sort of things. So this is basically, this law is saying, hey, we want to know exactly what you're looking for in these systems. And if these are going to hurt workers, we're going to block them.
Yeah, this reminds me of the other Amazon approach that we talked about maybe a month or two ago with the installation of driver monitoring cameras in the delivery vehicles. Both of those instances strike me as a bridge between human and robotic capabilities in terms of fulfillment. And the thing is, it's like we're in a transition, and I'm not saying robots are going to deliver your stuff or whatever. They do use robots to gather inventory. I know that in certain places. But during this transition, we're treating the human capital like robots.
Yes.
We're applying these algorithms like we would for any system monitoring to see, is the robot working up to snuff? We're applying that to humans right now, and that's not cool.
It isn't. Now, I would say I have an issue with this bill. So this bill doesn't call out Amazon by name. It talks about warehouse workers. Here's my problem. I think instead of going and writing a bill for a specific class of workers, I would like to see, well, at the federal level, I would like to see OSHA empowered with this ability. But in a state regulatory body, I would like to see whichever regulatory body in the state is responsible for worker safety to actually start looking at this across all industries. So I don't want a bill written for every single industry because that gives industries themselves too much power to step in and lobby for things that work better for them. I would like to see accountability for AI algorithms responsible for monitoring worker performance applied across the board. And I would like to have that conversation. And maybe there are special industry carve-outs that we do, but I really think that this should not be one bill per industry type thing. So that's just my take right there.
That makes sense. No, like a high-level framework that applies globally in the US, and yet you can have either exceptions or additions based on certain markets. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad that they're doing this. I wish they were doing it a slightly different way. But I do think it's important that it gets done and that, we have accountability into these things. All right, let's talk about bad news. Kevin, you want to just drop the bomb on all of us?
Yeah, I almost skipped this story because I figured people are tired of hearing us talk about the insecurity of Telnet, but there's more than just Telnet in this. This is a report from the security folks over at Kaspersky, and they're saying the attacks on IoT devices have doubled in a year, and they're basing that information on the many honeypots that they create to simulate IoT devices and other systems. So I started looking at the numbers, and I'm like, oh yeah, Telnet doubled from 460 million attacks to 872 million between the second half of 2020 and the first half of 2021. I'm like, Ian, this is not a story. But then they also added attacks on SSH or over SSH and web. Those are up fourfold for the honeypot testing. And that's concerning to me. It's almost like the Telnet's guys are like, yeah, we know we can hack this. Let's move on to SSH and web and attack all these IoT devices. So that's really concerning to me.
Agreed. I'm not loving this. So, hey, don't treat your home like a honeypot. Have good passwords. I don't know what else. Two-factor, good passwords.
I know it's the same thing. I wish we had more that we could offer here than the same old, these are the things you should be doing all the time. But until there's either some new technology or some new way of adding security, I don't know what else we can offer to people.
Yeah, there's nothing. All right. Hey, Z-Wave lovers, I have good news for you.
There's lots of them.
There are. Y'all love your
Z-Wave. We hear about it.
So there's a company called Thinka, and they have created a Z-Wave controller called Thinka Z-Wave. And it is the first HomeKit certified Z-Wave controller, and it works with more than 3,300 Z-Wave products for Apple HomeKit users. So this is a Dutch company, and the price of this...
You got to really want this.
Yeah, you're going to have to really want this because this is 429 euros or $507 US. But if it's the basis of your smart home, this may be worth it to you. I don't know. And yeah, I think that's really all there is to say about that.
I think a lot of people will be happy, especially the people who have dozens of Z-Wave sensors in their homes. I mean, if they're HomeKit, obviously this is great. If not, well, then so what? But
you could also use Homebridge to do this. So you don't have to buy this crazy hub if you don't want to. But if you're into that, it's there. It's probably a little easier. In other news, other product news, we've got a dog collar, and Cesar Millan has attached its name to it. So Kevin's already on board. But this is a dog collar called Halo. And there's a lot of smart dog collars. But Kevin, why don't you tell us why you're so excited about this?
Okay, first of all, this is not something I would buy because it costs $700 and that's discounted. Putting that aside, This is rather interesting to me because we had an invisible fence at our old house. We're not allowed to have invisible fences here in the townhouse community, and we have to have our dogs on leashes technically, but not everybody follows that. So the Halo collar acts like an invisible fence implementation where you set up to 20 geofences. So instead of running wire under your property for an invisible fence or putting up a physical fence, you can set these geofences up. That by itself is interesting. Not the first product to do that. But what is interesting is the approach that they take to let the dog know that he or she is approaching the fence. It's kind of like, I'm assuming this has a speaker because it can give encouragement when the dog stops, when it gets near the fence, or it comes back from the fence. It'll say, good dog. You also have multiple options to let the dog know in real time. It says real-time feedback that he or she is approaching the fence, such as static, other noise, or a vibration. So it's not necessarily like a shock collar. So I think that's pretty nifty. They also add in GPS tracking for your dog, which I guess they could escape the GPS geofencing.
There are always dogs that are like, aha, you shocked me, but the squirrel is way better than that.
Yeah, Norm got through our invisible fence one time. Yes, this is true. So you have the GPS tracking, which is nice. Caesar's custom 21-day training program. I mean, we like Caesar, but none of us to pay $700 for that add in there. I do like the idea of this because the way they're using the technologies and the sensors, and that's less of a, no shock to the dog from what I can see. It is kind of big, bulky compared to a regular collar, but it's water resistant. I mean,
you got to have the battery and the radio.
Yeah, no, I get it. So again, it's a lot of money, in which case I probably wouldn't buy it, but there are certainly people who might benefit from this. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting approach.
We wanted to let y'all know that it exists. Okay. Also in the, it exists category is a new app from Home Depot to manage smart home devices. They built something called Hubspace. This is actually...
Why? Why?
Because it's complicated. Because people buy stuff from them and they can't get it to work the way they want and they return it. And then Home Depot's like, So that's what this is about. And a company actually that used to sponsor the show, Affero, is actually the company behind building Hubspace. So yay. This lets you connect your products with a QR code, get them online, get them working. It works with Home Depot's products, like their smart lighting stuff that they offer, their branded stuff. It also works with some existing smart home products that are pretty popular. And, they're going to have their own, it's also worth noting they have their own like in-ceiling lighting that is like way cheaper than Philips, like Signify in-ceiling lighting for Hue, for example. Now, there is a concern, and we've seen this happen with Staples, with Best Buy, with, I feel like other companies. Oh, Lowe's. Yeah, you might invest in this and they might shut it down because it doesn't work. So, just keep that in mind that you probably, that's just a risk with everything. They have integrations.
They have integrations with Amazon and Google for your voice assistant. That's fine. These are Bluetooth and Wi-Fi products. Okay, they're not going away. But we all know Matter's coming. We know Thread is coming. We've seen, as you said, the Staples and Lowe's Iris going away. Like I see the need for making connectivity easier or setup easier, but I don't see that this has to exist because of that.
Well, I think there's two things to focus on here. One is Home Depot's own line of products that are cheaper and not being addressed by the market. So recessed lighting, things like that.
Yeah.
So recessed lighting, really cheap light bulbs, all of that. I mean, okay, there are really cheap light bulbs, but some of the other products, they just don't have counter lights. That is neat. And the fact that it works with Hubspace is fine. I think with things like Matter coming, you may want to wait for Matter to come and see if Home Depot gets on board with the standard, because then if so, I think this is great because it could be supported ad infinitum forever. Well, for as long as they work, because it can be picked up easily by the Matter protocol. So maybe you wait to see what happens with Matter.
Yeah, it just seems very niche-y in the current platform ecosystem right now to me. we should be moving away from that. And then you're right. There are definitely products that they offer that are less expensive or not offered traditionally and from other smart home makers. But
I mean, I would look at them for recessed lighting and some of it. Like, I've got to replace 3 can lights, and I'm like, ooh, this could be, because like Signify's recessed lighting is so expensive. I mean, if I want to make it smart. So, I mean, I don't have to, because I could just put a switch in. So, and here we are. Back to that conundrum. All right, moving right along. One little thing. Wyze is theoretically possibly working on a gun safe. This is not an announced product. People were just excited because it's from Wyze. This is something you could unlock with a key code or with a fingerprint, and you would get a notification on your phone that says, hey, someone unlocked this. I just mentioned this less because of the gun safe aspect and more because these devices are proliferating. So I see a lot of new products that are kind of offering smart safes to lock up things like weed as it gets legalized, guns, and, I don't know what else. But so it's a product niche that's out there. If it's something you're looking at, I used to think about, I know some people were doing their gun safes. They would put an open close sensor on it. They would also lock it, but they would put a sensor on it so they could get an alert when someone opened it, which I think is actually a pretty smart thing to do with something as dangerous as a gun.
Definitely. Yeah, so this wasn't an announcement or anything. This is somebody over at XDA Developers looking at the latest Wyze app, and they've noticed some code and images in there strongly suggesting, because these are good renders. I mean, I don't doubt this is coming.
Speaking of security and locking things up, we've got 2 big deals in the access control space. The Blackstone group has purchased Chamberlain, which makes the MyQ garage door opener, and lots of other things, including they had a line of smart home lights and stuff. They bought them for $5 billion. So yeah, that's significant. And that's a lot for the access control space, which is getting a lot of attention lately because of things like, hey, can we get package delivery inside our garages? What kind of home security? There's a lot of things that could happen in the insurance world here. Do I think all that will happen? Not anytime soon.
I wonder, only because we've had a history here with Chamberlain and MyQ charging for services that were free and then went back to free.
They stopped that. They had a new person come in and they stopped that. But maybe with Blackstone, they're like, no, bring it back.
That's why I'm thinking there's a possibility there, because you don't just buy this for the garage doors. You need to make recurring revenue as well.
Yeah. All right. I always think maybe you could charge things like Amazon, but we'll see. Okay. And the other big news in access control is AssaABLOY has agreed to acquire the hardware and home improvement division of Spectrum Brands for $4.3 billion. And you might be like, why does that even matter? Well, AssaABLOY is the company behind Yale Locks. They also bought the August Locks. And Spectrum Brands is behind Kwikset and Baldwin Locks. So basically, AssaABLOY is coming in strong with an investment in all the locks and
look out, Schlage.
Smart ones as that.
Look out, Schlage.
Yeah, look out, Schlage. And Schlage's parent company, just to make this extra confusing, is called Allegion. So when we say Allegion, we mean Schlage. Yeah, so big news here. We'll keep an eye on, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of innovation here, or if we're seeing this consolidation ahead of things like Matter coming out, when the hardware becomes much less important than the services that can be associated with it. So interoperability could lead to a wave of consolidation. That may not be what this is about, but it's worth thinking about. Okay, and that concludes the news segment of the show. Now it's time for the Internet of Things Podcast Hotline, which this month is sponsored by Very. Very is a fully distributed IoT engineering firm which partners with clients to build systems for smart manufacturing, smart energy, and utilities. Also, consumer electronics and connected wellness devices. You can discover what Very's multidisciplinary teams can do for you at verypossible.com/services. And with the IoT podcast, this is the part of the show where we listen to you. You should give us a call at 512-623-7424. You'll be entered to win a smart speaker of your choice, and we might play your question and answer it on the show. So Let's see. This week's question comes from Dave. Let's hear it. And I'm going to apologize for the audio quality on this, but we're going to listen to Dave.
Hi, Stacey and Kevin. My name's Dave. I'm an early adopter of smart things. I've put together a hodgepodge of smart devices in my home, and I'm happy with it. My brother-in-law, who is seeking my advice, he is remodeling a fairly large home with a foundation. He has no smart devices other than Google Nest speakers and Google TV. My question is, if money were no object, what systems would you install for lighting controls and whole home audio? Would you do something like Lutron RA2, Control 4, Sonos? I would hate for him to buy into some proprietary system that he can't upgrade or get out of in the future. I hope you can help. Thanks.
Okay, Dave, it sounds like you need some whole home audio and light controls, and we don't hear this often enough. Money is no object.
Yeah, you go, Dave. And Dave's, was it his brother?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the money is no object part of the question, which is, buddy, I would say call up the Savant folks if really money is no object, or call up Control 4 or the Snap AV folks, which bought Control 4. Having a professional come in and do this for you is going to be awesome. And both of these companies have features that work with other smart home devices. So if later on you want a Nest thermostat and you want to bring that in, you can make that work in with both of these systems without doing anything too fancy. I will say the Madam A integration on Control 4 is not awesome. It's a little kludgy, but you probably won't need to do that very often because you can just like press the buttons that they've specially put everywhere for you or use the tablets. So if you want a professional to come in and just do all this for you, there's value in that, and it will be easy and it will be expensive.
Yeah, I mean, you will have these nice tablet interfaces all throughout your house, and that is going to look cool, but you will pay for it. And you're not going to have quite as much control over automations and integrations that you would have with a DIY system.
Well, Control 4 does have I don't know if it's an app, if we call it an app or a service called When, and you can actually use that for if-then type statements to tie into other devices, which is pretty cool. And Savant has something a little similar.
Let's say you want total control.
Yeah, let's say that, Kevin. What should we do then?
Yeah. And you want to save a little money, even though money is no object.
I was going to say, these are not the cheap options. We are giving you the higher end stuff, which is a little easier. Right. But yeah.
And in fairness, this suggestion will be some DIY and also still may be expensive, but nowhere near expensive. For the whole home lighting, I'm actually going to agree with Stacey and say, go with Lutron.
But this is the Cassetta stuff. You don't need the super fancy Radio Raw stuff, which is what like Control 4 or someone might put in.
Right.
Go with the Cassetta, get yourself it's like a $75, $80 hub. Get yourself the light switches. You're going to love it. It's going to work with the existing Google stuff. It's what's in my home.
Did I just recommend a hub?
You did, but it's the Lutron hub. It works
it's more of a bridge.
It's a bridge. It works with HomeKit. It's probably going to work with Matter. It works with everything, Google, Amazon.
Yes, and they're very nice switches, very nice looking design switches. So now you've got your whole home lighting. Now, we don't know what music service or services we're talking about. Considering there was mention of Google TV and Google Nest speakers, I presume YouTube Music could be one of those music services. Doesn't necessarily have to be for what I'm going to suggest. You could go with more Nest audio stuff, but I would go whole home. I would go Sonos. And I would do that for two reasons, maybe even three. One, the sound quality, I think, is going to be a little bit better. That's my first one. Second, again, I'm assuming Google is the digital assistant here. You can have Google Assistant be, or Google Home be the assistant, the voice assistant on all those Sonos devices that you buy. Three, if you go with the Lutron whole home controls that we just mentioned, Lutron also has a $40 little wireless remote that lets you play pause, lets you fast forward, change volume, etc. Again, you can do that throughout the house by voice, but if you're just sitting around listening to music and you don't want to spoil the mood by talking, you can just pick up this little wireless remote. And it's all integrated because it works with Sonos. And I just checked the Sonos music service integrations. I thought there was like 10. There's like 40 now. So whether you use YouTube Music, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, or any one of a number of ones that I didn't even know existed, you're covered. So between those two, you're going to spend less. It's still not cheap, but you're going to spend less. And then you've got the whole Google Home and Lutron platform to control and automate things.
Now, I have to ask, because AV usually means television too. You've got that Google TV in there, which means you can do things like set up your movie nights and all of that using a Google routine and these systems. So if you have more than a Google routine and like some crazy fancy speakers and that sort of thing, this is not for you, but it doesn't sound like you have that. So, and you could also add like a Sonos soundbar to your Google TV, and that would probably be amazing and less than like in-ceiling surround sound speakers, unless you want to do that. And if you do, again, get yourself a Cedia guy, as I call them, and they're going to be amazing. All right. That concludes this portion of the show, but please stay tuned for Charlie Kindle talking about bringing IoT to space. And now let's hear from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Silicon Labs and the Works With conference. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Silicon Labs, and let's welcome John Dixon, who is VP of America's Sales and Global Distribution. Today, John is going to talk to us about Works With, Silicon Labs' virtual IoT conference coming up in mid-September. So for those of you who don't know Silicon Labs, please give us a brief introduction.
Silicon Labs is the leader in secure, intelligent wireless technology for more connected worlds. And as of late July, we're 100% connected on IoT. Our integrated hardware and software platform, our intuitive development tools, unmatched ecosystem, and robust support makes us a long-term partner in building advanced industrial, commercial, home, and life applications.
And tell me about Works With. Who is this virtual event ideal for, and why should they attend?
On September 14th and 15th, we're uniting the biggest names in the industry at the world's only forum where IoT decision makers and device developers receive practical training and actionable insights to build, deploy, and interconnect all the world's latest home, smart city, and industrial IoT technologies to get them to market faster. Works With is the only place where IoT developers can access unbiased expert support and experience hands-on workshops led by specialized engineers to learn how to implement various wireless protocols. Works With is also for business leaders and really anyone with an investment in IoT. And we'll host discussions about current and future IoT trends, including the latest with Matter, formerly Chip, Amazon Sidewalk, Google, Apple HomeKit, Z-Wave Long Range, and also Wi-SAN. This is a unique opportunity to bring all of the IoT players, developers, ecosystem partners, device makers, and alliances, bring them all together and basically share, collaborate, and learn from each other. And the great thing about all of this is that it's free. It's virtual and it's free.
All right. I love this event. So can you share keynotes, panels, any workshop sessions that you're excited about?
Yeah, the conference is going to be jam-packed. We got 60 workshops, technical sessions, and panels, and the keynotes are going to be great. The first day we have keynotes really focused around Matter, and we're going to have all the experts that drive the ecosystems inside of Matter. We're going to have Google, Schneider, and Amazon. And this year, we're also going to have APAC keynotes that are really focused on moving the IoT industry forward at a global scale. We're going to have people from LifeSmart, Conch, Tencent Cloud, as well as Tuya. And to wrap up, we're going to have IKEA talking about all of the IoT innovation they're driving in the smart retail space.
I've got to tell you, I am really excited about the panel that y'all are going to be hosting on the current semiconductor supply issues. There's going to be Arrow, ASE, the Global Semiconductor Alliance, and someone from EE Times. So if everyone else is as excited as I am, how do they register for Works With?
We'd love for you to join us virtually on September 14th and 15th. If you can't join live, registration will allow you to get on-demand access post-event. But if you want to register, go straight to workswith.silabs.com, fill in your details, and get registered for free.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Charlie Kindle, who is a former Microsoft and Amazon executive and is now working on space. Hello, Charlie. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Stacey.
All right. Well, we left your intro a little vague because you are doing some crazy thinking, and it sounds like in the grand idea phase of what you're working on. Do you want to kind of tell us where your interests lie and who you're helping?
Sure. Like a lot of people, when I grew up, I thought I was going to be an astronaut or somehow be involved in space.
Me too.
And then I got busy with my actual career, and I got sucked into the PC IT industry, and spent 30 plus years doing some really fun and interesting things here on Earth, but never really lifting a finger towards helping humanity get off the planet, which has always been a passion of mine. And so last year, when I left my last big job, I had the opportunity to pick what I wanted to work on next. And I realized that we're in this new era of space. Literally, people call it the new space era. And my expertise in building products, building software, organizations, and running large organizations that deliver stuff, it might be useful to companies who are trying to do stuff around space. And so I decided, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to break into the space industry, figure out how I can help and where I can add value. So I've been doing that since basically last November. And along the way, I've learned a massive amount. And along the way, I've started advising a bunch of different companies that need help with software and just organizations and how to execute. And so I've got 6 or 7 companies that I'm working with regularly in the space industry that are doing really cool stuff. For example, there's a company here in Washington called Stoke Space Technologies, and they're all about reusability. It used to be that when we launched a rocket, it was a one-time gig. It's kind of like flying a 730 or 747 from LA to Shanghai and then throwing it away. And that's just idiotic. And so how do we get more reusability? So Stoke is focused on that. Another company is focused on, I think this was something a lot of your audience will be really interested in, is communications between the Earth and human-made objects surrounding the Earth and between those objects. It turns out to be a really hard problem. This company is called Rebel Space Technologies, and Rebel is focused on using software-defined radios and machine learning techniques to automate the complexity of communications between these things. And another good example of a company that I'm engaged with is a company in Colorado called Ursa Space Technologies, and they make rocket engines. Lots of that going on. It's a lot of fun, and I'm learning. But I haven't yet decided where I want to focus my energies yet, and I'm still figuring that out. I do plan on finding a big job versus just doing a lot of advising and coaching. I'm sort of on the hunt for that right now.
Got it. All right. Well, that is a lot and very cool. So let's circle back to the big concept here, which is, you called it the new space flywheel. And I would love for you to explain what you mean by that.
You remember back when the internet was going to be a really big thing someday. 93, 94, 95, it was really clear that the internet was going to happen. And I was blessed to be part of, making it happen. I worked on Internet Explorer 3.0 at Microsoft. And I remember back in that time, seeing this kind of network effect that was taking place around these disruptions that had happened in some kind of fundamental technology. And I really have a real sense that space is at that point right now where finally, for the first time in history, private enterprise is investing massively in space and profiting from it, where previously it was almost all public. It was either, a military or other government things with telecommunications being part of it. But now it's private. So what are the things that are driving that flywheel? Much like we saw a flywheel occur around the internet. The first is, we already talked about it, reusability, more reusability or increasing reusability. And SpaceX is a great example of this, but so is Blue Origin and all these other companies that are making it so that more and more parts of every rocket is reusable, a lot like you see with airplanes. We're a long ways away from full reusability, but there will be a time not too distant from now where these rockets get launched hundreds of times. They fly up and they come back hundreds of times. So that's a key aspect of the flywheel. The next is more frequent launches. Going back to the 60s and the 70s, there's now an exponential curve of the number of objects launched into space on a yearly basis. if back in the peak in the 70s, it was 130 rockets a year. And by the way, at that point in time, it was a single thing went up with every rocket. By 2027, just Starlink expects to launch 12,000 satellites by 2027, as an example. And so we're seeing more and more launches happen faster. And those launches, because of Moore's Law and a lot of miniaturization, materials, the number of things that can get launched on each launch is going up significantly. So that part of the flywheel is more frequent launches, the increasing rate of launches. And then the next aspect of the flywheel is lower operational costs and friction. Traditional space launches involve hundreds, if not thousands, of humans for many years, focused on every launch. And via software, we are seeing significant lowering of those costs and automation, which lowers the overall costs. And so the third aspect of the flywheel is lower operational costs and friction. And then the cool thing about those three things spinning together is it generally is driving the cost way down. And what that leads to is more innovation. And just like we saw with the internet, we saw a bunch of obvious things people had dreamt about before happening and become real. Email became, ubiquitous. But other scenarios popped up that no one really imagined or thought was possible in our lifetime. I'll use Twitter as an example. Like, who imagined Twitter? But because of the lowering of costs, the access to technology, the internet enabled these new innovations that created massive businesses. And so that's the next. And by the way, that led to more investment in the flywheel. And we are on the cusp, I believe, of those new scenarios becoming real, whether it's manufacturing in space, whether it's more communication scenarios, whether it's being able to take advantage of off-planet resources like the water that's on the moon, or getting to Mars. And so those are the elements of the flywheel. We're at that point in time where my sense is it feels an awful lot like the kind of giddiness we felt in the mid to late 90s, where we're all kind of walking around. This internet thing is going to be really big someday. So that's how I view it.
All right. I like it. So when thinking about the space flywheel, my big issue, because I covered satellites all the way back in like 2005. And you're right, it was a super different world. There were regulatory issues. It was expensive. It was actually a lot of fun. But today, I feel like there are real challenges with satellite to Earth communications that we kind of overlooking. And some of those are things like, hey, you have to have a lot of satellites up there to actually get more continuous coverage. The battery consumption for devices is still pretty high on the modules that receive these signals. There's still FCC shenanigans happening all the time. So I guess when we think about the new space, we still have some legacy space issues to work through. And I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that.
That's a great point. And I could probably add a bunch of other things that are friction around communications and satellites. And then maybe these are covered in your suggestion that there's legacy problems. For example, satellites are moving really fast relative to the Earth, and keeping something pointed in the right direction is hard. The other one is the spectrum that is useful is limited, and it's also highly regulated and regulated differently around the world. And then you have this problem of satellites are not. They generally move around the world. And so it's really complex. My perspective on it is, up until now, the investment that has gone into solving those problems has been driven by traditional telecommunications companies primarily, because the costs were so high of putting a satellite into space. And the disruptions I just talked about around the new space flywheel, well, it's all about making those costs orders of magnitudes less expensive. And that leads to disruptive entities, firms that aren't constrained by the business models of the legacy telecommunications companies, which, by the way, are massively capitally intensive. At their core, their entire businesses are about massive capital expenditures and then trying to make that money back over time through some sort of subscription business model. So what we're seeing is entrepreneurs with creative ideas being able to actually do it differently. And I think the problems that we're talking about here around, whether or not You can have a ground station with a small battery that's mobile and inexpensive. Yeah, someone's going to solve that because they're not going to be dependent on the thinking of the 70s and 80s telecommunications giants.
Okay. And we should probably talk also about this is the IoT podcast. So why do we care so much about space? What is it that makes satellite communications helpful for the IoT? We'll talk about here on Earth, and I think later we'll talk about broadening our definition of IoT.
Well, I'm not sure I can have a conversation without broadening it first because...
Do it, Charlie.
To me, the term IoT is sufficiently broad already that, what it really means is how you have machine-to-machine communication between digital entities, digital machines. And there's no reason why the concept can't be applied to a light switch and a light in a home, and also be applied to a sensor and a motor in a manufacturing facility, but also be applied to two satellites orbiting the Earth, or a rover wandering around Mars that happens to have a helicopter under its belly, and how does it communicate with that helicopter? Which, by the way, Perseverance is using Zigbee, right? And so if that's not IoT, I don't know what it is. So I think we're already there. I think that the people involved in IoT should probably view space as a huge opportunity for the techniques that they're experts in.
That's true. There's things like, I'm worried about battery power. I'm worried about intermittent connectivity, dropping in and out. So those are all big issues. And
latency.
Oh, and latency. Yes. So let's then talk about what it means to build an internet for space. I was very excited to see Perseverance using Zigbee, but I don't know if Zigbee is actually going to be the choice of space communication or what that will even look like.
Yeah, we have to be a little bit more precise about which aspect of it. The Perseverance thing is one where you're, relatively close distance. The range is, measured in hundreds of feet, and there's particular latency characteristics and so forth. And that's very different from how Perseverance communicates back to the Earth. And there is a form of TCP/IP that is used, but has been modified to deal with the fact that you have latency now measured in hours, and you have reliability that is even worse than kind of the worst Earth-based scenarios. And so there's already been a lot of work gone on over the last decades to create variants of what we're very familiar with in our typical protocols, TCP/IP, et cetera, that account for these. Vint Cerf, one of the fathers of the internet, is very active in helping to define these protocols and standardize them, but particularly the ones that have to do with kind of interstellar scale communications. There's another scenario which is, how do you communicate effectively with things that are in either near Earth orbit or LEO, or kind of in the general vicinity of Earth. And there used to be a perspective that the existing internet technologies would just work. Turns out it's not enough. And the reason really comes down to spectrum and what we talked about a minute ago about the limitation of spectrum from regulatory, or just the fact physics make it hard to use all bands that are available to us. And also the complexity that is now happening because there's so many more satellites up there.
Are we talking about the Kessler syndrome? Like things running into each other?
Well, no, it's just that you're now talking about tens of thousands of devices communicating with each other and getting in each other's way. And I mean in each other's way relative to spectrum. I'll give you another example that illustrates this. Whenever there's a launch, because rockets sometimes blow up and bad things can happen, you have to make sure that the area around the launch facility is clear. And that involves ensuring that all communications around that facility for miles and miles are monitored and controlled. For example, you don't want an aircraft to accidentally fly into the area. It's traditionally been a very hard problem that launch companies have had to face to manage all the spectrum around the launch facility. And so one of the companies I'm working with, Rebel Space, one of their expertise is using machine learning to automate all of the spectrum management relative to the launch site, so that the operator, instead of having hundreds of people that are trying to monitor all these bands, It's done by software, lowering the cost and making it safer. To me, that is part of IoT because it at the end, you're using digital technology for machine-to-machine communications to solve some problem.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it sounds actually very similar to the complexities we're trying to figure out on the 5G radio side to deliver communications here on Earth. So do you think those technologies that we're developing for that will be helpful? Maybe not like massive antennas, but more like the software designed to analyze spectrum usage and interference in the channel? Could that be helpful in space?
It turns out the spectrum that is most ideal for these space scenarios is the same spectrum used by 5G. It also turns out that a lot of the technology that's been built out as part of 5G is perfectly applicable. And so what you're actually seeing is a lot of these efforts are leveraging 5G, but also trying to work to get 5G out of the way to some extent, because again, the regulations that were designed around terrestrial communications weren't really designed to take into account some of these space-based scenarios. So it's one of the things, for example, Rebel Space is investing in is not just the technology to make and leverage the 5G techniques, but also how do you navigate the regulatory waters and get us to a place where this stuff can work around the world without a lot of rigmarole.
And let's think about architecture questions, because we have a pretty good architecture and set of protocols for the internet here on Earth, I guess is what I should say. And, we think about, using TCP/IP. We've got the OSI model for like figuring out everything from chips to the application layers. Are there differences that we need to account for in space? Is it going to be simpler?
My guess is that it is going to be highly leverage everything we've done. We used to joke that TCP/IP and HTTP, the web protocol, were the grand unifiers because they worked just good enough for most scenarios that they gained massive adoption and became de facto standards. Everything that I know about protocol design and then the challenges in particular near Earth tell me that on the whole, those existing techniques are going to be just fine. There are some things where new invention, either on top of TCP/IP or on top of the existing protocols, or adjustments further down the stack, down their OSI stack, are going to be needed. So, for example, handing off who's in charge of a communications link happens much faster in space-based situations than it does in typical terrestrial situations. The fastest vehicle on the planet that requires a handoff is our typical airplane, which are generally going under the speed of sound. But normally it's things like people walking around inside of a building and a phone being handed from one access point to another. Again, very, very slow speeds relative to satellites moving around Earth at tens of thousands of feet a second and having to make transitions very fast. So that's like a good example where and already is. Swarm is an example of this, where people are inventing new protocols, generally on top of existing things that account for this. And the fun thing, at least from my perspective, it may not be for some of the people directly involved, is that we don't know who the winner is yet, and there's going to be a lot of innovation that's going to happen. But eventually, one of these things is going to win out, and we're going to have the equivalent of TCP/IP, but for space, and it'll be something that everybody uses.
And you're working with startups now. You've worked at two of the biggest tech firms there are. So do you think this is an opportunity for a startup to kind of come in like in 2000 or 1999 when companies came in and made a big name for themselves in the internet? Is there an opportunity for a startup or an upstart coming in and making a name for themselves? Or do you think the big companies are going to come in and take this over too?
I think just as has happened at every other point of disruption in technology, the big companies are going to be mostly left behind. And this is one of those things you're going to pay attention to. And 10 years from now, 15 years now, we're going to look back and we're going to say, what happened to that ginormous company? And who's this new upstart that now is the new trillion-dollar company? We are going to see that as a result of the new space flywheel. I firmly believe that. I think that a lot of the leaders, these big companies, whether it's Microsoft or Apple or Amazon, there's learnings that have happened from the past on how to create companies that are less susceptible to the innovator's dilemma and less likely to become the dinosaurs. But they're not immune from it. And we are seeing a significant investment by startups right now in space. I'm personally talking to literally hundreds of companies that are from anywhere from a couple hundred people to 2 people that are completely focused on new space. And there's entire venture capital funds and conferences and everything you'd expect to see is happening right now with the amount of money that is being poured into, the amount of capital that's being poured into new engagement. There's one other aspect of that, which is pretty cool, is how the traditional military has changed the way they engage with startups. It's happened in the last roughly 5 years, a major shift in how the Army, the Navy, the Air Force engage with early stage companies to drive innovation. And that is encouraging more and more startups as well.
Well, that sounds like a good topic for another show. So, Charlie, thank you so much for coming on the show this week.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's always fun to talk to you, Stacy. I appreciate you inviting me on.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Internet of Things podcast. Please join us next Thursday, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you can't get enough IoT news, I would love for you to sign up at www.stacyoniot.com for our weekly IoT newsletter, where we explain all kinds of things that we don't even get to on the show. Once again, thank you for listening, and please subscribe.